Well, elections are traditionally won and lost on which party voters trust with the economy. And today, both Labour and the Conservatives had big announcements. But whose plans stack up? Well, I'm joined now by the Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation and former advisor to Ed Miliband, Miatta Fahnbulleh, and by Julian Jessup, a member of the Academic Advisory Council to the right-wing think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Welcome to both of you. We saw the Chancellor and the Shadow Chancellor both setting out their stalls today. I suppose quite striking, really, was the similarities, actually, between the two. What did you think, Miatta?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, both parties now, there is consensus that we need to invest, which is good for public services that have been starved of cash for a decade and on their knees, good for communities that have been clobbered for the last decade. So the dividing line now on the economy isn't about spending, it's about which side has a proper response to the big structural problems we face in the economy. So the fact the economy isn't working for everyone. And, you know, Labour, whether you like their policy or not, have a clear reform agenda, and John McDonnell was setting it out. And the thing I thought was really interesting about Sajid Javid's speech is that there was nothing about reforming the economy. It was completely absent. And I just don't think it will cut it in this election. So they've got a lot of work to do to show the country we understand we've got big problems and we've got some answers that aren't the old prescriptions that we know don't work.
Chancellor ripping up the fiscal rule book, but we sort of saw some familiar territory from him as well, didn't we? We heard him saying you can't trust Labour with the economy. We don't want to return to the 70s in a rise in taxes. Is that what people can realistically expect from Labour?
I don't think so. So, I mean, it's difficult for them now because you can't you can't accuse the other side of spending too much when you're basically committing to spend as well. And I would put it in some perspective. So, you know, the OECD essentially recommends that developed countries should spend about 3.5% of GDP on capital, on infrastructure. Labour's spending plan is about 80 billion a year, so that is about just shy of 4%. We're currently spending about 2%. So it's not way out there. It's not completely outside of the realms. And I would argue, in the context of interest rates that are really low, it's probably about right. And the big area of spend, let's get right, was on climate change. We have a climate emergency, and they're saying we need about 250 billion in the next 5 years to begin to crack it. I heard nothing from that from the Conservatives, and for me that's hugely worrying because this is one of the biggest challenges we face. A lot of the public actually look at some of our essential services, the things that people rely on, you know, our bus service, our railways, our energy. This is not like, you know, things that you are nice to have. They're absolutely essential, and you do have to ask yourself, do we want them in public hands where we have accountability and control, or do we want them in private hands where actually we can get fleeced and there's nothing we can do about it? And actually I think the public are quite clear on this, and the polling is fascinating. We'd much rather it be in our hands, in public hands, rather than in distant private companies that really don't care about our interests.
What was interesting in John McDonnell's speech in Liverpool this morning, he talked about moving power and the control over money away from Westminster and talking about sending it to Liverpool to the north. With that, always, with the decentralisation of these sorts of things, comes often another layer of bureaucracy. What do you make about criticisms for that?
Well, I mean, so I think he's completely right on this. You know, we have huge regional inequality, and we're not going to crack it if the centre of power is in London, if all the spending decisions are made in London, because in the end, as well-meaning as the politicians and the civil servants are, unless you're on the ground, it is very hard to make those investment decisions. So we absolutely have to push power out. And the question is, at what level do you do it? You know, for me, we should be thinking about building the capacity of local government that already exists. We should be thinking about the sort of new regional authorities that are being created around local enterprise partnerships and think about how we strengthen those. And you put money in their hands and you get them to drive local economic growth.